Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Good morning, grade 11 students, my men. I hope you're doing great, and I hope that you're enjoying your vacation. And I'm sure that you're already enjoying your vacation. Uh-huh. Don't tell me that you already missed the school. Today, inshallah, we are going to explain a new lesson due to the new circumstances. So, inshallah, we're going to explain the new lessons electronically. So, today, inshallah, we're going to start with chapter 22, lesson 1, which is named Plant Life Cycles. The first thing that we should know at the beginning of the explanation of this lesson, that any plant has its own life cycles, but it differs from one type of plant to another type. So let's start. The first thing that you must know about this topic or lesson, that all plants alternate between two phases in their lives or in their life cycle. We can mention the two phases as follow. The first one, we can name it, the two phases are: number one, a phase called sporophyte. Sorry for the handwriting, we are trying to do our best. And the second type called gametophyte. So these are the two phases that all plants alternate between them during their life cycles. Okay? Let's move to the next part. Any plant life cycle alternate, as we said, between producing spores coming from sporophyte and producing gametes coming from gametophyte. Okay? So the two-phase life cycle, when any plant life cycle alternate between two phases, we call this what? We call this alternation of generation. So the meaning alternation of generations, or the scientific term alternation of generations, means the alternating between two phases, which are, remind me please. Yes, the first one is sporophyte phase, and the second one is the gametophyte phase. So, alternation of generation means alternating between two different phases. The first one, also we can say that they are haploid phase, and the second one is diploid phase, and the plant life cycle alternating between these two. If you look at this figure, you will find that you have two types of phases. The first one, sporophyte phase, and the second one, gametophyte phase. If you realize and focus, you will find that one of them, haploid phase. You know what's meant by haploid? We have haploid phase and we have diploid phase. If you look at this figure, you will find some things or some topics here in this figure has this number, or what's written here beside it, 1n. 1n means that they have a one copy or single copy of chromosomes. Here, or half of the chromosomes of the they must have. The second type, this means haploid. So, haploid equal to 1n. Which phase has haploid number? For sure, if you look at the figure, you will find that 1n is related to the gametophyte, starting from spores, moving and changing or developing into gametophyte. Then it will produce, this type of plant will produce the gametes, which have one N or haploid number of chromosomes. The second phase named sporophyte, which is diploid. Diploid means equal to 2N, which related to the second phase, sporophyte phase. If you look at this figure, you will find something very important. You must know this, something that in the sporophyte phase it happens through what? Through mitosis. We can write mitosis here. Starting from producing spores here, it must happen through meiosis. The moving and dividing by meiosis through the gametophyte phase till reaching the fertilization, which happens between one N, the male, and another one N to produce the zygote, which has two N, and then it will divide by mitosis to produce the sporophyte, and again, etc. Okay, so you must know which phase is done by mitosis and which phase is done by meiosis, which phase is haploid, which phase is diploid, and for sure the names for the two phases, sporophyte and gametophyte. So let's move forward. In the coming part, he will explain the life cycles of three different groups of plants. We have already studied them before, and we are going to remember them together. Here he is giving you another information or some other information about that spore-producing plant. Spore-producing plant is the sporophyte. The part which is responsible for producing spores is called or named sporophyte. What are the characteristics for the sporophyte, guys? The sporophyte phase is, as we said, diploid. Yes, number 2 begins with the fertilized egg, as we said in the previous slide, fertilization. Spores produced through what? Through meiosis. So these are three main information about the sporophyte phase. They are diploid. Sporophyte phase is diploid, begins with the fertilized egg and happens through meiosis. The gamete producing plant is the gametophyte. The gametophyte is the next phase or the second phase alternating between them. Okay, here the difference. If the sporophyte is diploid, be sure that the gametophyte is haploid. Okay, sporophyte produce spores, gametophyte for sure produce gametes. Okay, like sperm, like eggs. Understand? The gametophyte phase begins with the spore after meiosis. And the last thing, gametes produce through mitosis division, while here in sporophyte through meiosis. So these are the main differences between the two types. By the way, these differences are very important. Let's move to the next part. He is going to explain the life cycles of three different groups, starting with the life cycle of non-vascular plants. Non-vascular plants, the famous example, non-vascular plants are mosses. We already studied this before. So the non-vascular plants are mosses. Okay? Non-vascular plants have a dominant gametophyte phase. The dominant phase here is the gametophyte. What's meant by dominant? Dominant means it remains or stay for a long time than the other phase. So here, if you look at this part, you will find it looks like a green carpet or blanket, staying for a long time even. the whole life cycle of the plant. Okay, and the dominant phase, as we said, is the gametophyte. Most sporophytes shoot up as stalk-like structure, while if you look below here, you'll find the gametophyte, which is a haploid phase, looks like the green carpet on the ground, while the sporophyte phase, you will find that they looks like the stalk-like structures. If you focus, you will realize that these stalk-like structures or sporophytes, these are the sporophytes, guys. Okay, has or have a sac-like here at the top of the stack named capsules. Inside these capsules, there is something called sporangia or sac-like structure that contains what sporophyte. So for sure it's supposed to be spores, which are 1N. So here you will realize that the dominant phase is the gametophyte phase, and the stalk-like structure is the sporophyte phase. Inside it there are spores. Okay, let's move to the next part. The sporophyte here, he is talking here about the second type of groups of plants, which is the seedless vascular plants. Seedless vascular plants. Which phase is the dominant phase? It's the sporophyte, opposite to the mosses in the previous part. So here the sporophyte is the dominant phase in the seedless vascular plants. What's the main the famous example? The famous example is the fern plants. We already studied this before. Okay, fern spores formed in sacs. If you look at this figure, you will find that the lower surfaces of these, we can consider them these structures. You can find sacs-like structure, or underside of mature sporophyte or underside fronds. These are the that contains, guys, the sporophyte. Okay, contains spores. A fern gametophyte or orthallus, you must know this word, produce sperm and eggs, and we are going to look at a figure or a picture explaining or clearing this. This structure, guys, in fern is called or the gametophyte. Its name is prothallus. What's the prothallus? The prothallus in ferns is the gametophyte phase. Okay, if you look at this figure, you will find that they have structures here that responsible for producing the male gametes, which are spores, and the female gametes, which are eggs. Certain structures. We are going to watch an image or a picture showing here. If you look at this picture, you will find that this is the prothallus or the gametophyte phase in ferns. You will find that there are two types of structures. You don't need to know the meanings. It's up to you. Archegonia or Archegonia, and the second type is called Anthradia. Archegonia and Anthradia. One of them is responsible for producing sperms or male gametes, and the other one is responsible for producing the female gametes, which are eggs. Okay, this is it, to be obvious. So let's move to the next part. As I told you, the prothallus has two structures that are responsible for producing male and female gametes. After production of them, there will be a fertilization between them, producing a structure called the zygote. The zygote, okay, forms on the prothallus, growing into sporophyte. So zygote is the beginning of the formation of the sporophyte. This is the second type life cycle, seedless vascular plants. The last group life cycle is the seed plants life cycle. The seed plants. We are going to talk about the seed plants life cycle right now, resembled or represented in represented in the pine trees. So the third group is the seed plants represented in pine trees. The sporophyte is the dominant phase, like the first group or the second group, like mosses or ferns. Think. Yes, it's the sporophyte is the dominant phase, like in case of ferns. Pine trees are the typical seed plant sporophyte. In this type of plants, the female spores produced in female cones, and for sure male spores are produced in male cones. This is not a new information. Male spores develop into pollen grains related to flowers and plants. The male gametophyte in these types of plants is called or named pollen grains. I'm going to see or look at a picture explaining this. While the female spores develop into female gametophytes that at last or at the end will produce eggs. So we have pollen grains, male gametes, and eggs, the female gametes. Sperm from pollen will travel down pollen tube toward egg. Then, after this happened, a fertilized egg or a zygote will be developed into an embryo. Okay, let's look at this process and realize what's happening here. During the formation of this, let's see first the process of fertilization, then we will come back to this figure and finish our lesson. Here you can realize, guys, that this is the fertilization process happening between the sperm coming from a pollen grain. The pollen grain will start to form something called pollen tube. You can find this. This is a pollen tube. It will start to develop and grow till reaching the place where you can enter to produce or enter your sperm cells. If you can see here, you will realize that there are two sperm cells here trying to enter and fertilize the egg, producing the zygote or fertilized egg. This is how fertilization between pollen grain and its sperms and the egg inside the plant happening. Okay, so let's move back to the life cycle of the last type. If you look at this figure, you will find that the sporophyte here is also, as we said, is the dominant phase for the seed plants. Here, if you are going to start from the male cone, what's gonna happen? It will be divided by meiosis to produce male spores that are produced through meiosis. Then after development, the result will be a pollen grain or pollen grains will develop into the male gametes called pollen grains. Okay. And on the other side, the female cone will also be divided by meiosis, and the female spores are produced through meiosis. Okay. The result will be what the formation of a female structure called the ovule, okay? And the ovule here contains, we can say that these scales, I'm gonna explain this using a picture after finishing. The female scale spores develop into female gametophyte which produce eggs in the ovule. If you look here at this shape or this female cone, these things outside covering the outer part of the cone is called female scale. Each female scale contains the female gametophytes which produce eggs. Okay? After this, pollen grains with eggs. The result will be the process of fertilization. The fertilization process will result in the formation of fertilized egg, which will grow to form an embryo, okay, while the ovule surrounding it will form the pine seed. The pine seed here will grow again to form the sporophyte and etc. Okay, let's see the last picture to explain this obviously and move back. This picture or this diagram, I think it's more obvious than the other one. Inshallah, I'm gonna upload these pictures and these figures on the school website, the eSchool, or to use it in studying at home. Don't worry. I want to let you see another picture explaining what's meant by scales in the cones, and after this we're going to finish our. Here guys, you can find or you can see that these structures are called scales. These are the scales. Inside each one of them you will find the gametes that are responsible for the fertilization process. At last, I would like to thank you for listening and interesting, and I hope inshallah to be able to understand what we have studied today, and I hope you're doing great inshallah in your vacation, and have a nice day. Thank you.